So good day everyone. Let's talk about communication perspective. But before we proceed, let us contemplate these three questions. First is, how does communication process work? What major ethical issues face communicators? What is communication competence, and what can you do to achieve it? How effectively you communicate with each other is important to your career, not only to your career, but also to your personal relationships, your ability to make or keep friends, to be a good family member, to have a satisfying intimate relationship, to participate or lead in groups, and to prepare and present speeches depends on your communication skills. During this course, you will learn about the communication process and have an opportunity to practice basic communication skills that will help you improve your relationships. The communication process. Communication is a process of creating or sharing meaning in informal conversation, group interaction, or public speaking. To how this process works, we begin by describing its essential elements. The participants, which is who, messages or what, context or where, channels or how, interference or distractions, and feedback or the reaction. First is the participants. The participants are the individuals who assume the roles of senders and receivers during an interaction. In other words, we humans, kita. Second is the messages. Messages are the verbal utterance, visual images, and non-verbal behaviors to which meaning is attributed during communication. To understand how messages are created and received, we need to understand meanings, symbols, encoding, and decoding. Meanings. Meanings includes the thoughts in your mind as well as the interpretations you make of another's message. Meaning are the ways the participants make sense of the messages. It is important to realize that the meanings are not transferred from one person to another, but are created in an exchange. Symbols. To express yourself, you form messages made of verbal symbols or words, the way we speak, non-verbal cues, or the facial gestures, or the hand gestures, and visual images. Our symbols are words, sounds, and actions that represent specific ideas and feelings. As you speak, we chose words, symbols to express your meaning. The encoding and decoding is the process of putting your thoughts and feelings into words, nonverbal cues, and images. Decoding, on the other hand, is the process of interpreting another's message. Form. When the meaning we wish to share is complex, we may need to organize it in sections or a certain order. Message form is especially important when one person talks without interruption for a relatively long time, such as in public speech or when reporting an event to a colleague at work. Visual images also need to organize and in good form if they are to aid understanding. An example of this is PowerPoint presentation. When using visual aids, you must use visual aids inappropriate to the context in order to ensure that the participants will understand what you are trying to imply. So context, there are 5 contexts, which is the physical, social, historical, psychological, and cultural. First is the physical context. The physical context includes the location, the environmental condition, temperature or lighting and noise level, the distance between communicators, and the time of the day. Each of these factors can affect the communication. So especially in our current situation, when presenting a topic or present a PowerPoint presentation, we must be in a place or conducive for presentation, like a studio, to avoid noise barriers. So second is the social context. The social context is the nature of the relationship between the participants, whether communication takes place among family members, friends, acquaintances, work associates, or strangers influences what and how messages are formed, shared, and interpreted. Historical context. The historical context is a background provided by previous communication episodes between the participants. It influences understanding in the current encounter. Next is a psychological context. The psychological context includes the moods and the feelings each person brings in the interpersonal encounter. For instance, suppose Corinne is under a lot of stress. While she is studying for an exam, a friend stops by and pleads with her to take a break and go to the gym with her. Corinne, who is normally good-natured, may explode with an angry tirade because gihagad siya. But on the other hand, makatabang ni siya ni Corinne because she will have a break time for an information overload kay gikan siya sa a long period of studying. The cultural context. It includes the value, beliefs, orientation, underlying assumptions, and ritual prevalent among people in the society. Culture penetrates in every aspect of our lives, affecting how we think, talk, behave. Each of us belongs to many cultural groups, though we may differ in how much we identify to each other. So, an example of this is our current society, our world. We are divided in different races. What may be acceptable to that country may not be acceptable for us. So, next is the channels. Channels are both the route traveled by the message and the means of transportation. Messages are transmitted through sensory channels. Face-to-face communication has three basic channels, and these are verbal symbols, non-verbal cues, and visual images. So interference or noise is any stimulus that hinders the process of sharing meaning. Interference can be physical or psychological. Physical interference, it includes the sights, sounds, and other stimuli in the environment that draws people's attention away from the intended meaning. So an example of this is during in a presentation, nakita ang butterfly sa gawas. So ma-distract na hinong ka. And that's an example of physical interference. The psychological interference is the internal distraction based on thoughts or feeling. Example of this is during a presentation, na kay ginona nga past experience nga nakakatawa ka. So na-distract ni noon ka sa imuang pagpaminaw sa topic. So there are two categories, the internal noise and the semantic noise. First is the internal noise, which is refers to the thoughts and feelings that compete for attention and interfere with the communication process. Second is the semantic noise, refers to distraction aroused by certain symbols that take our main attention from the main message. So example of this is kaning symbol sa swastika. During a presentation, ang presenter he or she used the symbol of swastika, which is and nato siya lain meaning sa swastika for peace. So let us proceed to the feedback. Is the reaction or responses to a message that indicates to the sender whether and how the message was heard, seen, and interpreted. In face-to-face communication, we can express feedback verbally through our words or non-verbally through our body language. In online interaction, we can express feedbacks verbally through words or non-verbally through emoticons and acronyms. A model of basic communication process. The communication process between two people. In the minds of these people are meanings, thoughts, and feelings that they intend to share. These thoughts and feelings are created and shaped by the people's values, culture, environment, experiences, occupation, sex, interest, knowledge, and attitudes. To communicate a message, the sender encodes thoughts and feelings into messages that are sent using one or more channels. The basic communication settings. Process describes how meanings are shared in this course. You will learn skills that will help you communicate effectively, regardless of the type of interaction you are experiencing. But there are also important skills to learn that are specific to our particular communication settings. Communication settings differentiate interactions based on the number of participants and the extent to which the interaction is characterized of informal exchanges. First is the interpersonal communication. It is characterized by informal interaction between, ay, sorry, first is interpersonal communication, refers to the interaction that occurs in your mind when you're talking with yourself. While we may occasionally think out loud, we usually don't verbalize our internal dialogue. When you sit in a class and think about what you'll do later that day, you are communicating intrapersonal or talking to yourself. Second is interpersonal communication. It is characterized by informal interaction between two people who have an identified relationship with each other. So, as it is self-explanatory. A small group communication typically involves 3 to 20 people who come together to communicate with one another. An example of this is the FGD and also a support group. Public communication is a communication delivered to audiences of more than 20 people. Public communication includes public speeches and other types of mass communication that you may experience live, in person, or on delayed or mediated basis. An example of this is the sauna, which is televised live. So let us now continue. The communication principles. Principles are general truths. Understanding the principles of communication is important as you begin your study because they will provide a foundation for practicing and improving your communication skills. In this section, we discuss 7 generally agreed upon principles. Communication as purpose, communication is continuous, communication messages vary in conscious thought, communication is relational, communication is guided by culture, and communication has ethical implications, and communication is learned. So I will just gonna thoroughly explain the principle of communication has purpose. When people communicate with each other, they have a purpose for doing so. The purpose may be serious or trivial. They may seem or may not be aware of it at the time. Here we list 5 basic purposes for communicating that will be addressed throughout this chapter. First is we communicate to develop and maintain our sense of self. Through our interactions, we learn that who we are, what we are good at, and how people react to how we behave. Second is we communicate to meet our social needs, just as we need food, water, and shelter. Third is we communicate to develop and maintain our relationships. Not only do we get to know our others through our communication with them, but more importantly, we develop relationships with them that grow and deepen or stagnate and wither away. Fourth is we communicate to exchange information. Some information we get through observation, some through reading, some through media, and a great deal through direct communication with others, whether face-to-face, via text message, or online through email and social networking sites such as Facebook and Messenger. And lastly, we communicate to influence others. It is doubtful that a day goes by in which you don't engage in behavior such as trying to convince your friends to go to a particular restaurant or to see a certain movie, to persuade your supervisor to alter your schedule, or to convince an instructor to change your grade. That's all for today. Thank you and goodbye.